consultants here. I know we don't have a lot of you here, so certainly feel free to move forward. We just got done our another meeting in a little bit more fuller room, but certainly appreciate you coming out. The thought, what we're looking to do tonight is we are kicking off a parking study. We'll be looking at reviewing the parking in Lewiston Street, parts of Maine Street, basically our downtown, corridor around our, big businesses around here. The thought that we'd like to do before we get too far into that study is really hear from you. So if you've got comments, you've got questions, concerns, Dan is here to take all those in. And I'm going to turn it over to Dan and let him facilitate this conversation going forward. But you've got myself, like I said, Dennis Note, I'm the Deputy City Administrator. You've got the Police Chief O'Malley, and we've got Mike Parody here from our Public Works Department. So we're all here. We'll answer any questions you got and comments, and we'll go from there. Here's Dan.
Thank you, Dennis, and thank you for coming, folks. It is a small, intimate group, and that's fine. That's great. Unfortunately, or not unfortunately, but it's a public meeting, and so it's being recorded. So I'm mic'd, and I really want your participation, but it needs to be at the microphone because they need to record it. So I'm sorry for that, but I need to ask people to go to the lectern to give me comments so that they can be recorded and that the public can hear them. But I am conducting a parking study for the City of Lewiston. I'm with Walker Consultants. We are a very large parking consulting firm. That's the only thing we do is parking consulting. If it's related to parking, we do it. We design parking facilities. We do parking studies like this. I'm based out of Boston. We have an office in Boston. And this is my second trip up here. I'm coming up here to spend time with what I call the parking committee, members of anybody who is working here for the city and touches parking, whether it's the police or engineering, maintenance, planning, finance. I'm meeting and talking with them. I'm spending time out on the streets and sidewalks to see what the parking looks like, where cars are parking, where there are parking meters, what the time limits are. We had a meeting a little while ago tonight with business owners to get their take on everything. And now, as I always recommend with cities, we've asked the public to come in to hear what you have to say, because I know a lot about parking, and I can tell you a lot about parking, but I can't tell you a lot about Lewiston or about parking in Lewiston. You can tell me that. And my objective is to provide an overview of parking in Lewiston. So I need your feedback, because again, you've been doing it here a lot longer than I have. And so to kick things off, I have what I call the parking demand paradigm up on the board here, this triangle. This sums up why I'm usually called to do a study for a city about parking. Because usually you have three components to parking. Everyone wants free parking, convenient parking, and available parking. And if they're all available, then you probably don't need a parking consultant. But usually there's some kind of compromise involved. Actually, in any healthy city, you really would, if you're healthy or you're growing, then usually it means there's probably not all three of these available to everybody at all times. And it may or may not sound obvious, but I'll just go over how we look at this. I'll start with option one, would be if parking is free and convenient. Free would mean no time restriction and no fee to park. You could just drive up and it would be convenient. Say you're going to your favorite restaurant. You would park right in front of the restaurant. You open your car door, and that's where the door to the restaurant would be. The problem with that is that it's probably not going to be available for you all the time. If it's free and convenient, someone else is probably going to get there before you, because how big is the restaurant? There's only so many parking spaces right by the door. So chances are it won't be available under those circumstances. If it's free and it is available, that's probably not going to be right in front of the restaurant. It's probably going to be on the outskirts of the city. So it's not going to be very convenient, but it's probably not any reason to have a parking meter there or a time limit there. But it will be available. And then option three, convenient and available. In order to make it convenient and available, there usually needs to be some type of restriction on it, as I said. Otherwise, whoever gets there first is just going to leave their car there because that's where they want to be. So then you need to turn the space over, and that's usually either done with a time restriction or with paid parking. And so that's usually what brings me here, is to try and figure out the 2 out of 3 ain't bad kind of solution. There's always a compromise involved. So part of my study is hearing from the stakeholders. You're the stakeholders. And so I'm here to answer any questions you might have, but more importantly, I'd really like to get your feedback on your experience with parking in Lewiston. And again, not a lot of you have come, so I hope you'll all participate because you came. So you must have come for a reason. I do need to ask you to go to the lectern so that you're mic'd.
We actually have the wireless.
Oh, that's great. That's great.
Save everybody walking.
Thank you. Especially with so few, you may not even have to run around much.
Exactly.
You know? But again, please, I'd like to hear from you.
I was feeling lonely. Thank you for being here. So, Rick Mishu, I have a residence here in Lewiston, and also I have some businesses and commercial and residential properties, mostly along Main Street in Lewiston. We're by the... Is it Sam's? Sorry. Yeah. And so we own properties from the Sam's block all the way down to H&R block and on Middle Street as well. So our challenge is, you know, we certainly don't want to see meters there. I know I've heard from my tenants, and one of them was here earlier tonight, that you know, we'd rather not see that happen. Reasons are challenge for parking, mostly during Monday through Friday daytime. So the dynamic of the Lewiston downtown along Main Street is you can't find a parking space during the daytime. We get a huge influx from the hospital and the medical providers in the area, and the nursing school, so that there's a challenge there. After 5 o'clock, clears right out. There's plenty of parking, but the challenge is during the daytime. The other challenge, if we had meters along Main Street, we clean the sidewalks from 280 Main all the way down to 250 Main completely. We also clear the sidewalks along 236 to 242 Main Street. And meters would make that a lot more challenging to be able to keep that clear.
True.
The other challenge, one of the things I saw in the literature in the newspaper was that if you have meters that you're charging on the street, it's going to drive more people to your parking garages. But the problem for us downtown, we don't have those parking garages right nearby. So what that's doing, well, I believe there's one behind the PEX building, right? Private, yeah. So for us, what that would do is drive more people into our private lots, which are already very difficult to monitor. So that would be a burden for us, because we'd then continue to lose even more spaces for our, you know, our paying customers that park there, and our, you know, in the customers of our commercial tenants. The other challenge is we have a mixed-use buildings downtown. So, for example, in our block, in the middle of Main Street, we have 12 commercial tenants up there as well. 12 residential tenants, along with, you know, mixed in with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 commercial tenants just from in that one block. So the tenants in the downtown area for residential are not, you know, that would put an additional economic burden on them. So it's a challenge for them to, and a lot of them to make their rents, let alone have to pay for additional parking fees. We have the same challenge down the road where we have mixed use. We have 3 commercial tenants, where H&R Block and MC Cellular, we also have a counseling service in the back. And there's not enough parking to go around there either. So you're talking about 14 residential tenants in that building, mixed with 3 commercial tenants. And the parking would be a challenge for them to pay for. The other thing that the timed parking space allows for a lot of these folks in the cities was great to work with us on Middle Street because they had restriped and we lost the space for loading and unloading for people who live in the residential buildings to be able to bring in their groceries, bring in their laundry, those types of things. Bring their kids in, unload their cars, whatever they're doing. So those would be challenges for the residential tenants if we had metered parking down there as well.
Is there enough parking there today?
Not Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Some tenants can afford to pay for parking, and they do, and others just can't. So they take their chances, and so some will park on Bates Street, across from the Main Street buildings, and they will get out and, snowstorms, they'll move their car around, because they can park down by the core on both sides, I think, of Bates. So they're out there moving their cars. Down the road, there isn't enough parking either for everybody there, so some of them will cheat into the Health and Human Services building, Department of Health, DHS, and then they'll also park along the road near School of Nursing, but that's also challenging in their area for them to get out and have to move their cars regularly. So those would be some of the issues for us. And I know in Portland the parking program is a lot more expansive than it is here in Lewiston, but I think the challenges here are it's a different economic engine than you see there. So I think you got to keep that in consideration for what's going on in the downtown here for these residents.
Okay, thank you.
That's what I have.
Anyone else like to speak?
You're in.
I'm Tamara Grace Hopper. I live at 49 Lisbon Street. I have been a resident down here for 7 years. Owned a business down here for a number of years. I now own part of 49 Lisbon Street, but I'm retired. So I've watched the parking, literally, from my deck and see. And I used to be one of those people that took a great advantage of wherever I could get the free parking. But I have since come to the realization that the parking garage is my friend on many levels. But I still see too many people trying to bypass. I mean, the parking garage monthly for a downtown resident is $42 a month. It is pretty cheap. And I have no empathy for any of my neighbors who decide they're going to park on the street and they get tickets. It's too bad. We can walk that block and a half or 2 blocks. It gets inconvenient when I have to unload my groceries. It used to be that I could find a spot on Saturdays and Sundays when I knew I had to haul trash out or bring groceries in. But we have a lot of business now on Saturdays, and it's a very good problem. And so I have to be a little more creative about when I do my grocery shopping. What I would like to see are not meters, but I would like to see, number one, 2-hour parking instead of 1-hour parking. When I see people come down, they want to come down for lunch, they have business meetings or whatever, a 1-hour parking is not enough. And they get tickets, or they have to leave in the middle of something and move their car. Once you find a parking space on Lisbon Street, you're not going to move your car and find another one. So I think if there was 2-hour parking, it would be better for the businesses that are down there and for their clients. And I think we should go to something like they've got, I know they've had in Portsmouth and a number of cities that I've seen, where there's a box in the middle of the street and you go and you fill out a ticket and put your license number and do that instead of parking meters. I don't think parking meters don't seem, to me, they don't seem to be cost effective. We have a lot of them down on Canal Street. See how many people park down there. It's just, nobody parks on Canal Street. But I think if you took the meters out, then people probably would move down there to park. We have more of a walking issue than anything else. Nobody wants to walk any place. We would all be much healthier if we did. And we are filling up the parking garages. When the new residence opens up across the street from Forge, that's 61, 62 units going in there. That's gonna, even though they're each going to have a parking space in the garage, it's going to be a challenge. And as long as there's free parking on the streets, there's going to be a whole lot of people that are going to try to do that instead. And I know the police have enough to do, but I think that if we extend the timed parking to 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening, that would help. I mean, we're building businesses, we're building restaurants and nighttime businesses down here. And I think people should be able, the customers ought to be able to find a place to park. I have no idea how you're going to do all this. But, and some of my neighbors probably would like to tar and feather me, but we need paid parking. That's what we need to do to be able to control. I'm talking about Lisbon Street, and what limited space we have there should be for the businesses.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's going to involve compromise. There's not going to be one solution that is going to make everybody happy, but parking is a finite resource, and that's how we look at it. Again, not saying that means it's going to be paid parking, but it doesn't mean it's not going to be paid parking either. We don't know what it's going to be. You know.
The timed parking has been working very well for us on downtown Main Street. So they're signed well, and people respond to it. And it creates opportunities for the business clients that are down there. If they see a car that's parked there all day, they call the parking enforcement. They come over and they tag the tire and give them, and then they'll come back and check. And if they're still there, they'll give them a ticket. So that is working for us in our area. And I did have a question. I read that since the 90s, the city has removed more than 120 meters as part of redevelopment agreements. And I was wondering if someone could share why the meters have been pulled out as part of redevelopment agreements.
Is the business law, actually, Dave, could you answer that?
Need to be mic'd, yeah, sorry.
I can't give all the reasons for that, Rick. I can think of one situation since I've been here. We're in the Southern Gateway, where Northeast Bank is. When that development initially occurred down there in Kaplan University, part of the agreement was to remove the meters on Canal Street because they didn't want to park in the garage. They wanted to be able to park on the street because the garage was too far away. So it's situations like that. My guess it's just been years and years of negotiations. That's what it comes down to.
My point for bringing that up is that you're encouraging redevelopment of those areas and development of those areas, and part of that was understanding how critical it was for those new people to come in and not have the metered parking. So, my thing is we've been here a long time, and when everyone talks about taking, trying to pull in new business, I'm encouraging to, give the existing businesses the same respect and consideration that you're giving to the new ones. And if it's good for the new businesses to remove parking meters, then it's certainly good for the existing businesses not to put them in.
And I think there might be a little confusion. We had this from the last meeting where we got the whole business. We are by no means advocating for parking meters. I don't want you to think you're going to come here and talk against parking meters, so we're all pushing it. We're just trying to get input from businesses and the folks that live in these areas of what would work best for them. I mean, when we were here, Mike Dostey wanted parking meters. Rick LaChapelle didn't want any. Phil wanted them in front of Victor Newsy, wanted his 50-minute spot. So we have a lot of mixed use, and it works for you on Main Street, isn't going to work for what Mike, Dusty Jewelers. So that's what we're just trying to get input from everybody. So I don't want you folks to think we're saying we all want new parking meters everywhere. That's not what we're advocating for. We're just trying to get input of what works best for you. And if you're saying the time meter works on you, that's fine. And we did have a lot of folks talk about enforcement issues, and I'm aware of that issue, and I'm working with the administration and hopefully the city council to try to address some of that in this upcoming budget.
We're all advocating for our own concerns, so.
Exactly, but that's why we want the input, and we do want to encourage the businesses, and it is changing, like you said, of, people now come downtown at night to go to, the restaurants where 10 years ago that wasn't happening. So it is a changing, and like the councilor said, it's a good problem to have.
Anyone else like to speak? Please.
My name is Zach Pettingill, city councilor, but I'm here on behalf of myself today as a resident. Parking has been a bane of my existence since opening up my business here. I know it's a big beast, but like Tammy said, extending the hours that we charge for parking, and I've done a lot of reading, with Don Shoup and his books, and I follow a lot of that. I know there's a lot of places that have started to do, all day metering, and it's working out better for them. 12, I believe it's 12% of our downtown is dedicated to parking. So again, it's not that we don't have enough parking. We have more than enough parking. We're losing money with the amount of asphalt that we have downtown instead of businesses. One benefit to having metered parking is taking that money and then in turn putting that money back into the area that the revenues are collected for a very specific reinvestment. And then the big thing is it's not about the fix for today or tomorrow or next week, but it's where do we want to go? Anybody in this room, I'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't go to Portland or the Old Port and walk. Everybody parks and walks for their spot. It's transit-oriented development. We do have a walking issue. As once we get people out of cars, they're going to spend money, they're going to shop, they're going to be invested in our community and our city, and that's what we want. We need to have more options for transit, be it walking, biking, segwaying. It's not that I'm anti-car, but it's about giving people options. And I'm for metered parking everywhere. I understand that it helps create available spots and keeps flow through in those spots. I understand that it doesn't work everywhere, and this is about Lisbon Street, but Lisbon Street would benefit. There's no spots on Lisbon Street that are metered. We have spots metered on Canal Street. Nobody's going to pay for parking down there, or if they do, it's going to be all day. And it's not an enforcement thing, because that's not what the issue is. If we're not enforcing a parking spot, it's 50 cents, I believe. That's not even paying for the person to go down there. I do agree that we do need to have different lengths of time for that, the 1 hour, 2 hour parking. I know that with the boxes, it's a big investment because then you've got to get internet, and then there's securities that need to go down there with it as well. So I'm a fan of option 3, convenient and available. Because it's about where we want to go and where we want to be as a city. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, time limits and parking meters are parking controls. They're tools, to control parking, just like, traffic lights. Nobody wants to pay for parking. I understand that. I mean, nobody wants to pay for anything. Things that we're accustomed to paying for, we pay for. Things that we're accustomed to not paying for, we don't want to pay for. And I think in Lewiston, people are not really accustomed to expecting to pay for parking every time they park. People go into a restaurant, they expect to pay for the meal. So So it's more normalized, whereas paid parking is not. But it really is just a tool, and it may or may not be a tool that's required. Usually tools are used to fine-tune or to fix a problem. So it's a question of trying to determine if there is a problem, what is that problem, and what needs to be, what tool do we need to recommend or implement to either fine-tune or to fix it. Someone asked a question at a business owners meeting earlier tonight about why I was here. And one of the reasons, or how I happen to be here, is because a lot of your parking meters are outdated and need to be replaced. Some of them aren't working, and there's a lot of new technologies that really have improved parking meters to make it a lot easier to maintain them, to collect them, and to allow you to pay at them. You've probably heard of them, and you're probably familiar with, say, accepting credit cards at a parking meter, which makes it a lot easier to pay. And it's really hard to go out and buy a parking meter if you don't know about parking technology, because it's changed so much. And I think what happened was the city tried to do that and found that they really didn't know what they should buy and how much should they spend on it and what types of features do they want or need. It's just remarkable what is available now. The technology is remarkable. Basically, they're not parking meters were time clocks, really. They were really just they were vending machines where you put a quarter in and you turn it and it's got a timer on it. Today they're computers and they have modems in them. They're sending information wirelessly. So really they're computers with cell phones in them. So it's totally different technology that really can enhance what you want to do with it if you're going to use them. Again, I'm not saying you are. But for example, you could charge different amounts of time, different times of day. Maybe it's going to be free at one point, or maybe there's a 1 hour grace period at one point. Maybe it's going to be more expensive at another time. Maybe it's going to be different at different parts of the city, all based on what you need to do, basically to allow for, as well as you can, free, convenient, and available parking, which again, not going to get all three. So it's a matter of trying to figure out which you want and how you're going to get them. So that's more or less why I'm here. And the one thing I want everyone to understand is that compromise is always what I talk about, what's needed, regardless of whether or not you're going to add more meters or just replace the existing meters or reduce the meters or move the meters or change your time limits. It's going to be a matter of compromise, because not everyone is going to agree with what we do, because as one of you said, everyone is looking out for their own interests. And even if you're looking out for everyone's interest, it's just not a one-size-fits-all, because everyone has different needs. So I just want to make everyone aware that that's part of what my goal is. And what I'm going to do is spend some time analyzing all of the conditions and talking to some of my colleagues and looking at what's done in other cities that works. And then I'm going to create and write a report and submit it to the city. And it will have my observations as well as recommendations, and also an overview of all of the different options that are available, technology-wise, enforcement-wise, so that the city is in a position to make an informed decision on what they're going to do. And there will probably be a presentation at the conclusion of my study as well, so that, again, the public can see where we're at. But I'm really just on a fact-finding mission, and then it will be up to the city of Lewiston to decide on what they're going to do. Are there any other comments or questions?
Mike Marcotte, councilor from Ward 7. Having visited a few larger cities in the past couple of years, I'm not sure if this has been brought up yet already, but some places have parking permits on the side of the street. Like they may have different zones, white zones, red zones. During winter months, they have different processes in place where you can only be in those lots on certain days, probably for snow plowing purposes. I was wondering if you could talk to that format.
Well, if it's about snow removal, that's usually a separate type of situation, because it's related to weather. So, for example, it would only be done in the winter months. And I know you do that as well. You have certain areas where there's no parking throughout the winter. Permits are usually for either residents or businesses that allow them to park in certain areas, again, because you have a finite number of spaces. And so usually the color-coded permits usually are designated different types of user groups. Again, it's usually based on either residential or business. It could be business, it could be for business owners, or it could be for employees. Sometimes they're given out for free. Sometimes there's no fee. Sometimes there are fees for them. Sometimes they can have different time restrictions. It could be times of day or days of the week, or they could be just like a typical monthly permit. It's just another tool which incorporates usually a compromise of both, of either time limit, or as I said, time restriction, or of a fee. But it's not an hourly or a daily type of assessment, because it is for a regular repeat parker, either a resident or a business owner or an employee. There are all different types of permits and zones that can be done in that regard. You can have an area that is considered residential. You know, the challenge with residential zones and business zones is that they're next to one another. There's going to be a point where they spill over. And so usually if you have an area right now that is uncontrolled parking, and it borders a residential neighborhood, I don't know your areas well enough to give you an example, but if we then said, okay, we think that there's a little bit of congestion here, there should be metered parking here for people who are parking here and going to restaurants and to businesses, then people may decide to move a block over and park in the residential zones because they're usually free, right? You don't usually put parking meters in residential neighborhoods. So sometimes there are permits or residential zones that are defined to protect those areas. So those areas would be only for those permit holders, only for people who live in that area, or as I said, employees maybe who need to work in that area. Does that answer your question? Good. Any other comments or questions?
I was wondering if you could confirm that most studies that talk about free parking and available street spots in front of businesses usually are either owners or employees who are working at the place of employment that usually occupy the spots that are closest to the front door. If you could confirm that or deny it.
It's very common, yes.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, it's the paradigm with the free and convenient and available. If there are no controls, then the spaces are considered free and convenient right in front of the restaurant. But the restaurant owner or the employee is the first person to get there, and they conceivably could park there. If there are no controls, they could park there all day because it was free and convenient to them. So then it's not going to be available for customers.
For the customers throughout the rest of the day.
Right. It's a common problem. It's a very often reason we're called in, and often why cities, towns, whatever, airports, colleges, universities, why they look at implementing either time limits or paid parking is because they want to turn the spaces over. They don't want people parking in the prime spaces all day.
Yeah, gives the appearance that people are shopping or going into these to spend money, but they're not. They're there for work. Thank you.
You're welcome. Another comment you had made about paid parking everywhere, and again, I don't know that I'm for or against, but I think parking program needs to sustain itself. So if it costs money to run a parking program, and it does, because running a parking program includes enforcement, which is quite expensive. Labor is very expensive. But the one thing that I'd like to see, if it's possible, if there's an available parking supply, I'd like to see either free or very inexpensive alternative for people who can't afford to pay for parking, and to encourage people. But those would be, that would be the option of the free and available. It's not going to be convenient. So, you would say to people, okay, you want to park for free all day, that kind of thing? Okay, you need to park a little farther away. And ideally, that's what we recommend for, say, employees. Employees like, okay, if we can accommodate you without a fee, we will. Again, I don't know the particulars of the program. But if we can, it probably means you're going to have to walk walk a bit, and it should be a fair compromise that you should be willing to do that.
And part of that is working public transportation options. I know there's a lot of major cities that businesses will buy bus passes for their employees, and you get into other things such as parking requirements, and it's a deep rabbit hole. And I know this is only one part of it, but again, it talks about where we want to go and where we want to head as a city, as opposed to fixing an immediate short-term crush that, we'll be talking about again in 2 years or less.
Yeah, right, absolutely. In a perfect world, the only people who would be parking on the street would be parking for short time periods, and anyone parking for more than a couple of hours would be parking in your garages. That's ideally the way it works. But typically, garages are built. It costs a lot of money to build a garage. If a city's building a garage, you have to pay a bond. So therefore, garages usually are paid parking, and people accept that. It's more common. On-street parking, people think are free, and historically have been free because they were already there. But there are costs associated with maintaining them and policing them, and enforcing them. What we're seeing now in the past 5 or 10 years, Donald Shoup wrote the book, The High Cost of Free Parking, which you were talking about, and started to turn that upside down, and it's become a best practice. People are starting to understand that the high demand spaces should be the paid spaces. And Donald Shoup actually says, let the market decide what the price would be. Whatever someone is willing to pay, that's what the price should be. And that can go a little farther than some people want to go, because then that means that people who have more money can get that most convenient space because they can pay more. So I'm not saying that it would be a complete market-based parking program, although it can be, and some cities are doing that. But I think that it should be flipped around in that regard. The on-street parking is your most valuable resource, and you may or may not end up putting a price on it, but you should consider that it does have more value than the spaces in your parking garages.
And you talked about systems with monitoring the parking. I don't know how available they are, if the spaces have gotten better, but I know there's systems in place that allow you to detect if there's a spot that's occupied versus there's one that's not, in kind of a control room sense, which then allows you to monitor times of occupancy, whether it's high or low, and then will allow you to remotely set that pricing, so that way come Friday night, the spots down by the restaurants, you can increase that, and if you find that the spots aren't filling up as fast, will allow you to change that pricing. So it does make it market based, and it allows you real-time information so you can react on it, as opposed to the parking meters we have now that you can't. And I know it had come before the planning board before, and it's very costly and expensive, and I believe our current meters are outdated, and I don't think that they can be changed because they're so outdated. But more options and better usability for us, and better bang for our buck.
Yeah, that's the technology has evolved to the point where you can allow for you're saying variable rate pricing or demand-based pricing, where you can change the prices based on anything, really. But what you're talking about, what he's talking about, is the ability to try and ideally, in a perfect world, there would be a space or two available on every block. And so if you have areas now, at certain times of day, say on Lisbon Street, where it does get very crowded, maybe where the restaurants are, the idea is that you would use pricing to set a rate and see what is the sweet spot, what is the rate that is going to keep the cars turning over enough that there'll be 1 or 2 spaces available on every block. And as you go farther away from this congested area, maybe you reduce the parking. And you see some people are saying, you know what, I don't care what it costs, I'm going to park there, I'll pay more. And then other people say, no, I'm going to save a buck or a couple of bucks or whatever, a couple of quarters, and park farther away and walk. And so by allowing both of these, you create that that sweet spot of 1 or 2 spaces available on every street by having this variable rate based on the demand. But you can try and control the demand by implementing paid parking. Or you can do it with time limits to some degree, but usually paid parking is more effective for that type of a solution. Anyone else? Any comments, questions? Okay, great. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for coming. One more?
I didn't want to dominate the whole meeting. With the report that you're putting together, will it talk about issues of density and how that factors into this at all?
Yes, that wasn't a scope item per se of the purpose of the study, but I will address the density and again, what I see in different areas, and also there is some data that the city provided to me.
Okay.
So,
thank you.
Thank you. We're done.
Well, thanks everyone for
Oh,
coming.
I'm sorry, I just want to say if anyone would like to, I've got some business cards here. If you'd like to reach out to me in a more private setting, you can reach me email or phone here. I prefer email, but you can call me if you need to. You can also talk to the committee members, your city employees, if you have any other comments. Thank you.
How about you? Done that.